Well, it's been a couple of years since I've seen all of you, so I remember all your faces, but the names. But anyway, with all the devastating and heartbreaking news from Ukraine, it seemed a good time to call a happier time in the area. Several years ago, my husband Bill and I went to our son's wedding in Slovakia, which is a small country that has a 60-mile border with Ukraine. So now refugees across the land. My sister and I, my sister Virginia and her husband came from Minnesota and went with us on the trip. Perry worked in Slovakia a few years where he met Andrea. They got engaged and decided to get married in her hometown and have a traditional wedding in Nova Dedina, which is about 200 miles from the Ukrainian border. Okay, Perry met us in Bratislava, the capital, to escort us on a 2-hour train ride to Levice, a little town about 20,000 people, where we would stay for 4 days. Hotel Lev has this lovely small historic hotel with a round lobby and marvelous wide wooden staircase, circular, leading up to the second floor. Looking up from the lobby, you could see a beautiful sunlit stained glass ceiling. There were no elevators, no air conditioning. That afternoon, one of Andrea's brothers came to take us to Nova Dedina to meet the family. Nova Dedina is a charming little village of about 500 people. It has only one road winding through it. All the houses face that road, and they have white stucco walls, red tiled roofs, and beautiful flower boxes of red roses. The parents had a 2-story house that Lukasz Sr. had built on an acre of land. A trellis trail lined with green apple trees led to a small shed which housed 2 goats, geese, a rabbit, and a feed mill. On the lawn, the family had set up a long table under the white canopy where sat about 25 relatives, gathered to meet and warmly greet us and eat a hearty meal. Most did not speak English, so Perry and Andrea were busy translating. But the cute little grandma with her white embroidered cap told Andrea, "Nancy and I understand each other." Friday evening was equivalent to the American rehearsal dinner, but with no rehearsal, in Nova Dedina's community hall. Tables were set for about 50 people when we sat down, but I felt sorry for the family because I saw so many empty seats, but little did I know. Soon the doors opened and a parade of 27 villagers marched in, single file, each carrying a large open box of tiny and homemade pastries and fresh fruit. The boxes are placed on a long table that has several elaborately decorated cakes in the shapes of hearts, horseshoes, Bibles. One even had 25 very thinly frosted layers. There was also a special large bottle of wine that had encased in it a wind-up ballerina doll, which had been given to Andrea by her godfather when she was baptized as a baby, intended to be opened when she got married. So we all got a sample. In the kitchen, the church ladies were preparing a lovely meal for us and now divided the pastries and those fruit into 80 small boxes. Those are to be given to the guests after the wedding the next day. While we ate, a group of older men sang tunes a cappella with great gusto. That meal lasted 5 hours. Saturday morning, Andrea, her mother, and I went to have our hair done. Some things are international. At 2 o'clock, the 80 invited guests gathered on the family's lawn for a small ceremony to be led by a man we'll call the leader. Never did know to figure out his name. About 25 young friends have also had arrived from Switzerland, Romania, and Austria. They all spoke English, so that was a big help. Andrea had assigned one of those girls to escort us around for the rest of the weekend. Just Bill and me, keeping us informed of what was going on at all times. The gals are beauties. All seem to be dressed in silky long dresses with spaghetti straps and lovely hairstyles. The fellows all wore black suits. I know I'm biased, but Andrea looked like a princess, I thought, when she came out of the house, dressed in a beautiful two-piece white wedding gown. Yeah, there's a picture of it. Yeah, two-piece wedding with a touch of embroidery, a small hoop, scoop neck, off-shoulder cap sleeves, a string of pearls, and her long dark hair in soft curls with 3 white roses worked into her hairdo. It was all held together, I'm told, with 57 hairpins. She carried a spray of white roses. Carrie wore a new black 3-piece Italian suit. They looked smashing, I thought. Custom there is for the men to purchase their suits. They can use them later, but brides rent their gowns. That's not a bad idea. The leader then led us all to the top of the slope lawn. There, Perry and Andrea thanked their parents for all they had been given through their lifetimes, asking forgiveness for any wrongs they had done, and asked permission to marry. Prayers were given, followed by hugs and kisses. The leader then organized a long procession of couples, led by 2 flower girls carrying a cross on a white embroidered pillow, followed by Perry and Andrea and the rest of us. Andreas, quite the arranger, had arranged for all females to have male escorts, so there were no singles that day. The leader directed street traffic as we walked the procession 5 blocks to the church. We went by houses where people were looking out their windows or waiting on the street corners to see the procession. Some older women rode by at full skirts on their bicycles. It was quite colorful. Inside the small church, the organist played the traditional wedding march. It seemed there were several spectators hanging over the balcony railing, very curious. The service was in both Slovak and English. After the 1.5 hour service in the heat, a processional was played and we followed the bride and groom outside. There, we were greeted by 100 or so cheering and clapping village people. Andrea threw candy to the children, that's the Slovak style, and they in turn tossed rice, American style. Several guests had come with large bouquets of flowers, presented them to Andrea, who gave them to a special friend to hold for the rest of while we stood out there. My sister Virginia was told by an older lady who put her hand on Virginia's arm and said, "I touched an American." That was touching. A bus and a caravan of cars took everyone to our hotel in Levice, which is about 20 miles, for the reception. There was another little ceremony in the lobby, which was led by the leader, was a sudden crash and breaking of plates, with Perry given a broom to sweep up those broken pieces. The number of pieces predicting how many children they were. There were quite a few pieces. Suddenly, the doors to the hall flung open, and the musicians on the stage blasted out a Slovak polka. Perry lifted Andrea up and carried her into the hall. Very romantic. There, tables of white linens were decorated with candles and sprays of white gladiolas and green apples from those trees. No gifts were on display, but one table was covered with wedding cards. Throughout the evening, 5 full course meals of roast goose, chicken, pork, fish were served, with toasts and activities and dancing between the courses to make us hungry again. The leader led the guests in activities, once winding us in and around the room, and another, the bride and groom were lifted in their chairs above our heads. Once, the leader clanged a cleaver and a knife and acted as if he was going to cut off some of Andrea's hair. But alas, he only cut off the 3 roses. In a manner similar to our tossing the bridal bouquet, Andrea gave those 3 roses to the oldest single girl, who in turn danced around with each of the single men. don't know who'd want to admit that. To that. After midnight, this had been going on till midnight, Perry came and told us Andrea has been kidnapped. Of course, I was stunned, but relieved when he said, Mom, the fun has just begun. We started at 2 o'clock, remember that. Today's tradition is that a group of men take the bride and walk her through all the bars in the area, and the groom has to try and find her by paying ransom along the way in the form of drinks for everyone. After an hour, they all returned happily. Later, the couple disappeared again and then reappeared dressed in ethnic costumes. Now this is an ethnic costume right here of hers, and she wore this looked exactly like that. Hers was a elaborately embroidered and sequin dress and headpiece. And I will say that this was given to me by the ladies in her village. They made that, and it's all hand put together, and there are wooden spokes in there for the gathers, and that was very, very heavy outfit to wear, and the headpiece too, very heavy outfit. Perry wore the black woolen knickers, boots, embroidered floral vest, coat, and Swiss-like hat. Can you show that picture? Oh, sorry. Okay, fine. I find where it was here. Okay. Since these costumes are very old and rare, the individual pieces were borrowed from local families. And Perry tried on 14 pairs of boots to find a pair to fit. He was then blindfolded in the game. This was the best one, I think, in which Andrea and her three girlfriends sat on chairs. Perry sat on the floor in front of them and was to determine by feeling his ankles. And he's blindfolded which girl was Andrea. If his hand wandered too close to the knee, the leader paddled him with a stick. Another time we formed a circle and people had to pay to dance with the bride, while the groom was forced to stay out of the circle. Perry finally jumped into action, waving his wallet to buy the bride. He was then allowed to dance with her and swooped her up again and carried her out of the room, later appeared in the contemporary street clothes. By now, it was about midnight, 1 o'clock or so, and Bill and I went upstairs for a little nap. Excuse me. My sister took a shower. We all returned around 3:30 as a newlyweds danced the last dance of the evening, and we ate the final traditional course of cabbage soup. The music then stopped, and I was told the musicians stayed and played in the lobby till 6 a.m. Pity any other guests staying there at the hotel that night. After church Sunday morning, we went to the cemetery where Andrea laid on the family graves all those flowers she'd been given at the wedding. After another large meal in the community hall, we rode up to the hills to see Lukash's chalet and vineyard overlooking the valley. It was a lovely sight. It was finally goodbye time, and we headed home the next morning full of wonderful memories.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I have a map there with a magnifying glass so you can find Slovakia, and it's right next to Ukraine and below Poland. And, I think this is an especially appropriate time to share this story because it shows what goodwill and joy and love the people in these small villages have for each other. So you can imagine how that is for some of the people now in Ukraine.
May I just add a footnote?
Sure.
After 20 years or so, there's been a very successful marriage, and our daughter-in-law worked at Georgetown Medical School as an administrator, and our son has had a very successful career. We have two wonderful granddaughters that go to DCI school that's on the old campus of Walter Reed. So that's a wonderful end to a nice story.
So they actually didn't have like 75 kids. So I would just like to thank Nancy and her husband, Nancy, for sharing lovely stories. Anyway, we will begin now with the this flag was in Mary Ann George's mom's third grade classroom. How long ago? A while ago. 40 years ago. So we will pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So now, as you saw in the newsletter, April is a month when throughout, I don't know if it's, I think, well, in the United States, maybe around the world, David, you might know that, they celebrate trees. So we have Arbor Day. The Arbor Day in Maryland is going to be this Wednesday. I think the National Arbor Day is the last Friday in April, which I think is the 29th this year. And so we are going to celebrate trees, and you can see that Carol Giantuano put 3 darling little trees on our table today. And so we have 2 guest speakers who will share information on how we love trees and how we can take care of trees. Our first speaker will be Chris Aubrey. He has served as the chair of the University Park Committee on Trees, Parks, and Environment for 10 years. He and his committee are the voice of advocacy for the town's silent citizens, the thousands of trees which enrich our lives financially, physically, and emotionally. He will share his thoughts on University Park's tree canopy and talk about why he believes it is a shared resource owned by all, for which we have a moral imperative to nurture and safeguard. Chris. He's passing out some handouts. And I had the privilege of working with Chris and his Ivy League team a couple Saturdays ago. It's called Ivy League because we go around the town. I've only done it once and I got ant bites. Anyway, but we pull the ivy off the bottom of the trees to help them, to help them.
Is it okay to put this down?
Well,
Or no, is this being broadcast?
yeah,
Oh,
to the people that came.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And see, they'll see.
All right. Well, thank you for inviting me here. This is wonderful to be out in public. This space is so beautiful. I'm like marveling at the flags and all the colors. It's so good and all the people, with everybody dressed up. This is so wonderful to be out with human beings in a group. It's so marvelous. Thank you for the nice introduction, Jean. And I'm gonna just I promise. Well, in addition to being the month where we celebrate trees, it's also National Poetry Month. And I did promise Jean that I would present Joyce Kilmer Oates's Trees. I spent about 15 years in the city of New Brunswick, New Jersey, where Joyce Kilmer was from. And he at the age of 33, he died in World War I. I always thought that was exceptional because he didn't have to go. He was past the age of the draft, past the age of service, and he volunteered to go. And that always struck me. And I think it relates to these times. Just seeming the changing of character and I don't know if people, I hope they would be, but I don't know if people would be that altruistic. Doesn't seem like it of late. Anyway, I'd like to recite this poem by Joyce Kilmer. We all know it. Trees. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. Yeah. I identify as a poet. I had a business in Central Jersey called Poetry Service, and I was a climber and a pruner, and turned down a lot of work because people want to take down their trees, I feel, for all the wrong reasons. They're putting acorns in my gutters, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's dropping, I don't know, leaves on my driveway, et cetera, et cetera. So right now, talking about the canopy of University Park. So the Committee for Trees, Parks, and Environment is an advisory committee. We have no power per se, but we can advise the mayor and council. And we've been advising the mayor and council for some time now, about 5 years, to please get some data on our tree canopy. There is no data that exists. We have old data, but we need new data, and we need to know what is the status right now. And you can actually order older data is available. So if we could do a comparison and see what the trend is. That's, I deem that critical. As Jean mentioned in her introduction and in the newsletter, the canopy of University Park is a shared resource. The notion to me of private property, including living organisms, is aberrant. Particularly when we know now through the work of Susan Simard, the scientist from British Columbia, that all trees are interconnected through their mycelium, this massive unseen root structure that feeds and nourishes, and actually trees communicate through this network, much like a nervous system. And they talk to each other in ways that we can never understand, but they do signal each other somehow when there's a threat in the environment, like a beetle or a fungus or something like that, and they exchange resources accordingly. And not just oak to oak, maple to maple, but oak to maple to elm to hickory. You know, they all kind of collectively unite and share their resources. And if my neighbor cuts down a tree in his lawn, my trees are going to suffer because of that. And just like it's interconnected up above, it's interconnected underneath. I mentioned the getting a proper survey of the canopy. Just sort of, I guess, I just have a feeling. I have a feeling that we have lost some canopy since we moved to University Park 11 years ago, and it's of some concern to me because the neighborhood drew us in because of the canopy largely, and all the beautiful shade trees. And there's a feeling when you go to a neighborhood that has well-established canopy. It's just better on the psyche. I don't know how to put it, but you know, and that's been proven that trees provide mental, emotional, physical benefits, certainly by filtering the air and putting more oxygen out, and just the shade, the cooler temperatures. And then we have some of the other benefits include financial. There are metrics that exist that can determine the value of a tree, a single tree, or multiple trees on a particular property. So your house might be worth tens of thousands of dollars more if you have a well mature shade trees on it. The trees provide intangibles resulting from these community aesthetics that are beyond monetary calculation. They are curb appeal, that would go under financial health benefits. Buffering noise and wind, that would be environmental benefit. Reducing and mitigating the heat island effect. We're talking a lot about Guilford Woods of late. That's part of our canopy. Yes, they're several hundred yards beyond our border of the town, but those trees are linked to ours. And if those trees go down, the heat goes up, which will then impact our trees. Wildlife habitat, most particularly oaks, have been shown to be a very, very important environment for a lot of different creatures, birds, mammals, and then the more higher up hawks and things like that. So as mentioned already, beside all these benefits that I think are sufficient enough for us to safeguard this resource, is sort of more morality or ethics. I believe that that it's our responsibility as citizens of the earth to protect these resources and pass them down to our descendants. We have a lot of, we're upstream from the Chesapeake Bay, so what we do here is going to impact the bay ultimately, and all the rivers and tributaries and such that lead to it. Also, we are very close to the University of Maryland, which is the state's land grant university. And by example, we should abide by their attempts to get the citizenry to respect this resource. We have neighbors with tree ordinances in place. We're trying to get an ordinance, is what the tree committee is trying to do. And the ordinance would extend to all trees in the town. It's in its current form, it only asks that if you take down a tree of a certain size, that you will, and it's a healthy tree, you would then be required to either replace the tree or to provide money to a fund to the town that would then do it for you. And you could do it in your own yard, or you could do it elsewhere in the town. The ordinance also provides for a registered consulting arborist, which is an arborist that by ethical standards of the practice cannot be associated in any way with any kind of money-making tree company. They must be totally neutral and objective in their assessment. And the town would provide, at the town's cost, citizens the opportunity to, if you're on the fence, you say, oh, I think that tree doesn't look too healthy, I think I need to take that down. You can have the arborist come out and make a determination, objective. Hopefully that could save a few trees. And then the third part of the ordinance would be the reforestation program. We like to call it the legacy trees, where the town would identify sites in town that need more trees and ask people if they would like to sponsor a tree, essentially. And the town, entirely no expense to the resident, would plant the tree, purchase a tree, plant the tree, and all the resident would need to do would be water if required. So we're working on that, and I think it'll be before the council for consideration on April 18th. April. Wait, today is the 4th, right? Yeah, April 18th, 2 weeks from today. So that's all I have really. I really hope that you can stand behind the ordinance. It's relatively benign. There's nothing that would prohibit you from taking down a tree. But we're asking that you give it some thought. And, you know, hopefully if you're on the fence with the health of the tree, you can get an objective ruling on that. I'll be happy to take any questions.
I don't live in University Park, but as the community mentioned Guilford Woods, I'm curious if, I'm sure you're involved beyond University Park in this issue and the whole thing about climate and how it affects that. Has anybody, I was thinking about this over the weekend, has anybody ever thought that in a certain area, you should make sure that a percentage of, should be green space? In a town like University Park, you can have a lot of it. But Guilford Woods, like you said, it impacts what happens to your community. So, on the broader sense, has anybody thought about, areas that should be green space? Because, in percentage wise of their communities. Just an observation. But thank you for that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That might be something. Remember when we talked to our delegate? Yeah, that might be something if we wanted to as a club.
Or even county line.
Yeah.
Do that, because then we'll protect places like the Guilford Woods if there's not a lot of green space in communities.
I mean, that seems to me like that could be a good community action activity.
Columbia has that. A certain amount in Rossville has community. A certain amount of land has to be set aside in green space. It's sacred. You can't touch it.
Yeah, it's yes.
I have a question. When the tree belongs to the city and that particular tree is causing a lot of expense with the roots going into the water pipes of the house, we pay a lot and the city doesn't have an answer for that. They say the tree's healthy, we're not going to touch it. So what is the answer in that situation?
I guess contact your council person. And,
Yeah, but they say the same thing. We can't do anything. The tree's healthy. We're not gonna mess up with the roots. Which of course the tree is here, but the root is all over your yard. And I think that's very difficult too. I mean, I have nothing personally against the tree. But if I end up paying every 2 years for a big job for the plumber and everything to come and work with mine, just to find out that in a couple of years we're gonna be in the same. I don't know what the answer is.
yeah. Sometimes exceptions have to be made.
I think if you're the homeowner, you can remove, but it's at your expense.
But no, the tree is next to where we park the car. So it belongs to the city. But the root is coming, and it's been there for a while. So it's a beautiful big tree, but it extends definitely under all my front garden and with my phone.
I think that's legal. I think you can say that.
They don't have to. I've been with the city several times saying this is what it is, here are my bills, what suggestions you have. And the answer is always, oh, well, that's it, that's the tree. We're not gonna mess up with it. Okay.
I think we all say that trees are wonderful, but I think people preempt or supersede.
I would hope so. And the less money I have now, the more I'm starting to look at the tree and saying, what in the world are you doing to me?
So we had that issue in our neighborhood. I'm in Hillendale Gardens, and so we're in Delphi. And we had enough of the trees And we were told now by the state, it's a state arborist told us that the trees that they selected for our neighborhood were inappropriate because the roots were attacking all of the water lines, and we had all these backups and sewer backups and everything. And so WSSC worked with the state, and we got some of the trees down, because even though the county came and they, you know, they did it by the sidewalks, they cut the roots and all that, it didn't do any good. And WSSC had to put a thing in my yard, and if it ever happens again, I have to call them, but they removed the tree, but it was in cooperation with WSFC in the state.
And that was a town tree, or do you remember?
It was a, native trees, let me think.
No.
Oh, no, it belonged to the county.
What, the county's tree?
Yeah,
What street is that?
and Truxton Road, we have them in our neighborhood. People would love those trees to all die. No, really, they choke off, they're ugly. They're ugly because Pepco comes around and trims them.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
awful. I mean, they mess them up something awful, so they look awful. And the second thing is they have these little teeny tiny leaves that you can't get up. And those clog everything up. They clog up our storm drains and everything because they clump together. So we finally got some replacements that the state approved of. So we take them down. We're getting other trees planted by the county.
Let me ask my people.
David?
Yeah, just a minute, David. So Jana and Paula, have you been able to hear that discussion? Could you hear that? A little bit? A little bit, okay. I need to, here's a microphone. The people at home. I realize we have some people watching at home.
I think Rachel will talk about this, but there's a climate action plan that is developed in our county.
I'll just.
Council. And one of the things that our plan is trying to plan the larger campaign of the whole county. It seems right now about 50% of the county has is trees. And I think there's an effort to try to at least maintain that or possibly increase that. That helps all of us because of some of the things that Chris has talked about in terms of and oxygen and all the things that are why the trees are so good. I wanted to ask Chris a question about our canopy of university. When I look at it, it seems like a lot of the canopy is not along the street, but in the yard. And some of the trees are pretty large. I'm just wondering, when they were originally doing the development there, probably have to just kind of speculate. But now, if you're going to develop the site, they just tear everything down and you build. And I was wondering if you built a lot of the houses in our town, which are now 65, 75, 90 years old. Did they leave those trees there, or most of these are just developed over 65 or 70 years? That seems like that's where the big trees are now, in the back of the house.
Yeah, I would say that, so as I mentioned, I've been with the committee for 10 years now. And before I came, the approach was very hodgepodge and kind of at the request of the homeowner. I would like an X tree in front of my house. Now we're trying to do right tree, right place. If there's room for, excuse me, if there's room for a shade tree, we're in the past. So, you know, in respect to Pepco, you should plant understory trees under the side of the street where the wires are, and opposite shade trees on the other side. But there had been a long period where a lot of the shade trees, opportunities for shade trees were planted understory trees at the request of the homeowner. So we're trying to address that going forward. And I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, my question actually was, why we have most of the really big trees are in the back, and we're all just growing after 7 years, or they, if it's someone making an effort to build houses, but leave some of the trees in the back of the lot.
I think in olden times, people weren't that inclined to do clear cutting. If there were big shade trees, they would leave them and work around it. It's just, you know, economy of scale now, just, yeah.
Well, were you in town when we had the mini burst?
Yes,
I lost 11 trees, and
Wow,
my next door
yeah.
neighbor lost 13.
yeah, we lost one. Yeah.
Luckily, one of the trees for my neighbor fell away from the house, because when it fell, the root was much taller than the house. So this thing would have gone the other way, no house. And I think it took, I fought with the insurance company and everything. I also had to pay a lot of money to clear my yard, because it looked like the world had come in there and a bomb had been dropped. So, yeah, trees are nice, but when something major happens, nobody seems to be willing to help, including our foremost, the insurance company. They were arguing the trees were not responsible unless it hit part of the house, unless it hit, we won't pay for it. So like I said, per se, I like trees, but my problems with them. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And so I don't know who is there now. Okay, so Chris is going to stay around for a minute. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Rachel Lamb. She is Maryland Sea Grant State Science Policy Fellow in the Maryland Department of Environment's Climate Change Program. Rachel supports carbon assessments and accounting for Maryland's natural and working lands. She also works to advance supportive policy for strategic carbon sequestration activities relative to the state's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act and broader participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Rachel earned her PhD in Geographical Sciences at the University of Maryland College Park, where her research centered on the applications of NASA's carbon monitoring system science to advance strategic reforestation with co-benefits for biodiversity and human livelihoods. So Rachel, thank you. And she also will tell you about the 5 million tree initiative that Maryland has the goal for 2030.
Thanks so much for the invitation to join you today over the lunch hour. I live just up the road in College Park Woods, lots of trees in College Park Woods. So happy I could join you in person. I also prepared some additional information that I sent electronically to Jean so she can distribute it afterwards. If there's anything that I say you want to capture that way, just with some more details about some of the initiatives that we're undertaking at the state level. So maybe some background for me. So I actually grew up in Michigan, Western Michigan. So I enjoyed being outdoors. My family spent lots of time out on Lake Michigan or out in our regional and national parks. My father was also a minister. And so from a young age, I sort of learned to love and appreciate the world around me as something that was worth stewarding or caretaking on behalf of maybe not just the one who made it, but also because the world around us benefits people directly and is also just something to enjoy and celebrate. So I kind of developed this sense of stewardship and love for the world around me. And I was really interested in trying to figure out how to study it. So caretaking requires that you know something about the thing that you're trying to take care of. And so when I went to college, I studied environmental science when I was really interested in nature itself. And then I also was really interested in how people could make decisions about it, that they could influence it by the actions that they took or didn't take. And I had thought that public policy was a really interesting approach to caretaking. So there's lots of things we can do as individuals and in community, but we can also support with advocacy at multiple scales. So I moved to Maryland to do some graduate work, and I studied public policy, particularly environmental policy, and then I continued on in my study as a scientist. And when I was here at the University of Maryland, I learned more about the study of geography or geographical sciences. I didn't really know much about the discipline, and I bet if I asked you what is geography, you'd think of maps. And that's partly true, it is maps, but it's all about the role of new science and technologies to help us understand and map, for example, where our trees are, and then start to quantify some of those benefits across space and over time. So that's kind of where the NASA part of my biography came in, because NASA is developing a lot of really interesting science and technologies to help us quantify and track those benefits across scale. So when I was in my PhD program, that's when I learned to study forest in particular, trees or forests. And so that was a lot of my focus, was on how do we represent or quantify the benefits that our state's forests provide us now? So what can we benefit from if we protect them or maintain them? But where are additional benefits possible if we plant trees? So if we reforest them or plant urban trees. So because of my interest in the science and the policy, I spent the last year as a state science policy fellow, which is a mouthful. But part of that was trying to get more early career scientists actually working for state agencies or in public policy to help them develop policies that make sense with good science. That's not always the case, right? There's lots of inputs that we need to have good policy, and one of them is good science. So it's been a really great learning experience there. And just last week, I started a new position as the agency's lead for quantifying carbon benefits of not only trees, but agricultural lands and wetlands as well. So now I have a new permanent job at the agency continuing to do this work. And so part of what I wanted to share with you is some of the work the state's doing to expand our natural and working landscape, particularly around trees. All right, so if you put on your policy hat with me a minute, last year, the General Assembly, Maryland General Assembly, passed a new law. And it was called the Tree Solutions Now Act. And what our legislators wanted us to do was plant 5 million more trees in the state by 2030. And one of the primary motivations for that tree planting was because of the climate change benefits that trees provide. So on that handout, I think it's nice, thanks Chris, you can see that there are multiple parts of a tree, right? There's the branches, there's the trunk, there's the roots. All of that living tissue, about half of that is carbon. So trees are natural climate solutions because as they grow, they store that carbon in their tissues. So when you protect them or maintain them, they're a natural sink or a reservoir of all of that carbon benefit. And as they grow, they suck more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and keep storing it as carbon. So by planting more trees, we're expanding the capacity of our landscape to help us fight ongoing climate change. So the legislature was saying, how can we find ways to plant more trees in order to support our actions on climate change, but also generate all of these other wonderful co-benefits that we talked about. The fact that trees help us locally in improving air quality, and they help with water filtration, and they can mitigate urban heat island effects. They can provide habitat for wildlife. There's so many benefits that trees provide. Let's figure out how we can put some money behind tree planting, and particularly do it in a way, which I really appreciate, is in the right place, the right tree in the right place at the right time, and making sure that we don't result in all of these potentially negative consequences of trees, like planting them around infrastructure where they're not maybe designed to work well together. So how do we maximize the benefits and make sure to reduce the costs? So these 5 million trees are going in the ground across the state, but they're prioritizing about 10% of them for urban underserved areas. So there's a new program that is put together by the Chesapeake Bay Trust. If you've seen a Chesapeake Bay license plate on the back of someone's car, that money is actually going to the trust. So the Chesapeake Bay Trust has lots of grant programs. They're getting $10 million per year to implement this urban tree program. And what they're really doing is looking to put trees in areas that might historically have been considered hazardous, like lone hazardous grading. They've been red lines where there's high unemployment or low statewide income. And they're trying to really make sure that trees can improve all those benefits we talked about, that people who might have not experienced those benefits previously could now experience them into the future. So it's really an environmental justice oriented program. And in the documents I sent, I looked at the map of eligibility and I put University Park on the map as a little point to see. And University Park proper doesn't really meet the underserved criteria, but if you look at the map, a lot of the neighborhoods surrounding University Park do actually. They are eligible for these 5 million trees, or particularly 10% of them. So I think this is really interesting because this program is really designed, they just opened up their first year of grant requests. And so they're going to be announcing who got those grants soon. But the county, for example, has a lot of interest in accessing these funds in support of not only their tree canopy goal, but also really identifying locations where these trees can maximize benefits for underserved communities. So there's a lot of interest locally and in the county in particular about how to access some of these monies to plant new trees. And the funds are really looking to engage local communities in the work of not only planting them, but importantly, maintaining them. So we want these trees not just to, it's really exciting and fun to go out in your yard and plant a tree, but unless you're maintaining it very critically for the first, at least the first 3 to 5 years when it's really starting to grow and gets enough water, and then post that period, we're hoping these trees stay in the ground for at least 15 years, if not longer. We need to make sure that we have a landowner support for that, community investment in that, and then making sure that we have a way of monitoring how those trees are doing over time. So this money goes a lot towards getting these trees in the ground and making sure that they're cared for over time. That's about 10% of those 5 million trees. So what about the rest of them? Well, one of the initial efforts is by Maryland Department of Agriculture. So we have a lot of farmland in the state, and farmers, you know, are on the front lines of a lot of caretaking for the Chesapeake Bay and the Chesapeake Bay Health. So one of these programs is actually providing an incentive payment for farmers to actually grow forests along stream sides. Sometimes you might hear about them as riparian forest buffers. It's one of the key goals of our participation in the Chesapeake Bay program. And so it's actually providing an incentive for farmers along marginal cropland. So not necessarily converting prime ag land to trees, but trying to identify lands that are near where their crops are being produced, where they could grow more trees. And those trees actually provide a really helpful natural service, and that they help mitigate or buffer some of those nutrients from running right into the waterway and in turn the bay. So we're hopeful that by further incentivizing through $1,000 per acre bonuses, that some farmers may be interested in enrolling some of their lands into tree or buffer growing. And then the third set is a range of programs offered by the Maryland Forest Service. So right now, if you were looking to plant a tree in your backyard, one of the things you could do is part of the state's Tremendous Trees program, Tremendous Maryland program. They could give you a coupon that would reduce the cost that a single tree from a nursery would cost you, and you could go purchase the tree, get advice and technical assistance from Maryland foresters to know which tree you should be getting and where to plant it. You can access some resources now through the state. They really want to expand those, right? And there are some of the monies is actually going to pay for new technical assistance personnel. So hiring more foresters to be of service to both rural and urban areas. A little bit in line with what you were talking about before in terms of making sure that if people have questions about trees, that they know where to go and they can get the right consultation so that we get trees where they should be and mitigate potential risks down the road when the wrong tree is put in the wrong place. So there's a lot of money being invested in technical assistance and even innovating new types of programs to really help people access the information they need for tree planting. And I think what you're going to see, because 5 million trees is a lot of trees, I think you're going to see a lot of new partnerships and coalitions forming with groups like yourself, who maybe you have a lot of interest in tree planting, but maybe you would be looking to someone who has the technical expertise to inform on, you know, where specifically the trees should go or what type of trees. So trying to partner together, interested civic engagement and associations with those kinds of more technical oriented organizations who can provide some of that consultation service. So it's a big lift getting to 5 million more trees by 2030. My agency, Maryland Department of the Environment, is charged with coordinating and tracking all the tree planting that's happening in the state. That's a lot of work. That's my job now. They tell me that's my job. So one of the resources that I'm trying to bring to the table is some of this really cool geographical science work that we did with NASA. Wearing my scientist hat, one cool thing about NASA science is that it uses remotely sensed data. So that's information collected by aircraft when they pass overhead, or by satellites that are in space, but they're pointing down, let's say, a radar or a light radar down to the ground, and it can give us a lot of interesting information, like where trees are, where they're not, how tall they are, and then we can use that information to help quantify how much living tissue they're storing, how big they are, and roughly how much carbon they're storing. So we've actually been able to map the entire tree cover area of the state and model how much carbon it's storing and how much more carbon it has the potential to store if we plant these new trees. So it actually gives us real quantifiable data to use to determine how well we're doing relative to these goals. Are we really storing more carbon by tree planting, or are we losing more trees than we're planting? And in fact, having a no net benefit. Where are we putting the trees? Are they going all in one place, but we're still missing out and really putting trees in these underserved urban areas? We say we're going to grow 500,000 more trees. Are they actually being maintained or monitored over time, or are people not caring for them? So by using this remotely sensed data and coupling it with some modeling that we do to associate that data with the amount of carbon they're storing, the state has a really valuable way of tracking these changes over time. And we're the first state in the nation to use it. So actually, Maryland's right on the front line of using really cool, innovative science and technology to help us. Now, does it answer every single question we might want to know? No, I think there's more science and research that can be done to help us improve our understanding of the landscape and its benefits for people. But I'm really encouraged that Maryland is often kind of an example to other states, particularly in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, about how we're using our trees to accomplish a lot of these important societal goals. So there's some cool images I included in those slides. Sometimes it's easier to just look at them than hear about them, but you can see the map and monitoring that we're doing over time, and updating those benefits every year when we go to assess how well are we really doing. LiDAR information is really amazing. It often is done at the county scale. So some counties invest money to fly aircraft and collect this data. Other counties, maybe because it costs a lot or they don't have enough resources to do it, might generate that data less frequently. So we've done some work at the state scale to kind of harmonize that across the state. And even when a county can't afford to update that data, make sure we have a backup or a backstop so we can continue monitoring, at least at a little higher scale, what's happening. So this is just a real world example about how science can be used to shape and inform better policy, and make sure that if we say we want to plant these trees and maintain them, that we have a mechanism for making sure that they are cared for, at least observe whether or not they're being cared for. And then perhaps if part of the problem is something around access to resources or the need for more coalitions, we can, iteratively work to improve policies and programs to make sure that those enabling conditions are being met at a very, very local scale, like your and my backyards. I think I might pause there. Again, what we're really trying to do, if I had to summarize, is making sure that these new trees are optimized for all those benefits. So that they're good for carbon, but they're good for all of those range of things we already talked about. We're making sure they're in the right place and that it's the right tree. We're also making sure we have effective monitoring to make sure that we can track changes across the landscape, so we actually know whether or not we're reaching our goals. And then we're also making sure that we're connecting landowners with resources. So we're trying to make sure that we're sensitive to what we're hearing through the new Urban Trees Grant Program and other programs to make sure that people feel like they have access to what they need to plant and care for their trees. So happy to take any questions or hear some thoughts from you about what you think about this new goal.
So for our ladies at home, this time I will bring the microphone to the ladies so you can hear the question. I think, Marion.
I
you had
just
your
wanted
hand
to
up.
comment that how appropriate the background is that you can't see, but the reflection in the windows is all trees. It's just very nicely planted. It's terrific.
I just have a question. Are you connected with any group that would defend the trees that we already have? Very recently, we had a very bad experience in College Park, a wonderful wooded area that was taken down for the benefit of Whole Foods and other things that came. And that was extremely sad. So yes, we have to be careful with new trees, but we also have to try to conserve what we have and be heard of, because there was a coalition of all the counties around there. We went and tried so much in different governmental groups, and we were thoroughly ignored. When they came, even before they had been told they could start cutting trees, they did. And when questioned, they said, oh, well, we can plant some little ones. How long is that little one going to take? So I wonder, do you have any group that helps you work against that as well?
Yeah, so a lot of land use planning is done at the county scale. So while the state can set some high level expectation, or it has, so for example, in the Forest Conservation and Preservation Acts, anytime the state, using state monies like transportation projects or highway projects, anytime they remove trees or tree cover, they're required to mitigate them, meaning they're required to plant new ones. Now, to your point, there might be some interpretation on what it means to mitigate, fully mitigate, right? So you might say tree for tree. They do, they plant, they trade tree for tree, or sometimes it's 3 to 1. For every tree they remove, they have to plant 3 more, but they might be in a different place. They might be a different size, right? So that's actually an active question right now in front of the independent commission that I staff and support. They're actually asking this question: what does it mean to fully mitigate trees that were lost due to particularly state level, because that's where they have authority, right? On state with state funded projects, what it means to fully mitigate. Now at a county scale, there are some levers you could pull around, again, same kind of idea. If you are needing a permit from, let's say, the county to do something for some development or land use planning, what are you required to do? Are you required to mitigate them? In many cases, for their water quality, trees water quality benefits and our bay goals, there is some mitigation. But those are the types of questions, right? At the county scale in particular, and then in some cases even further locally. That's why these additional ordinances or additional permitting requirements or land use planning is so important, because there is some high level precedent the state can send in terms of a signal. And I think the state legislature is weighing how far they want to dig into what the counties can do. But in Maryland, counties have an incredible amount of power that's specifically around land use planning. So in that, I know the example you're talking about, it has a lot to do with permitting and what's allowed in terms of development and what it means to mitigate. So it is a good question of what do you want, right? What do you want in your county? If you have to maintain a particular tree canopy, then maybe in order to be permitted as a development, you have to make that up in some other way, but the definition might matter there. So I can't be too prescriptive, but I would say, yeah, you're right. The county and local ordinances have a lot to do with what it means to mitigate tree planting or protect and maintain what you have. But there's always competing interests in terms of where you put trees. And if you maintain tree canopy across a large domain, maybe that means taking it down to one place and putting it up somewhere else. Pros and cons to that for sure.
I didn't realize you were here when I asked the question about percentages, but I'm curious if through your research or for your directives on the state level, are you going to look at what is already existing and save it from development? In terms of, what, but I also have an aside. I have a wonderful Bartlett pear tree in front of my house that since the day I planted it, everyone told me it was going to go down. Well, now, but it's a wonderful shade tree, and so far it hasn't gone down. But if I asked for another tree to replace that when it does, is it going to be big enough to be the shade tree that I use now? And the other part is, a couple of years ago, I did get a tree from the county. They did it out near the street, but they would only give me one, and they would only plant it there. So the issues continue, and I think even though there's a desire statewide to do these things, like you said, everything's local, and University Park at least is a municipality that has more governance than those of us who live in Adelphi who are not under municipality and have really no one to go to except the county council person who is pro-development. Thank you very much. Just my little.
No, thanks. I appreciate those comments. Well, in support of the Chesapeake Bay program-wide goals, the state is generally tracking tree canopy cover. That's one of the metrics of so what they really do at the state level towards our water quality goals is implementation of those riparian streamside buffers I talked about. That's one of the key metrics that they're tracking. So they want to put in more trees along stream sides, and they want to work with landowners who are within X number of feet of those streams to prioritize that. So they're tracking that metric, and then what they also track is tree canopy. So one of the current sources for that is that data isn't updated every year. So what they are doing, I think the EPA has invested money through the Chesapeake Conservancy, which is an NGO that does some of the geospatial science I was talking about. So they update that tree canopy cover change metric, and they're about to put out a report. At least they're always a little bit behind. So the data takes time to collect, then process, right? So they're going to look at change data between 2017 and 2018. And they're going to compare what it was around 2011 to 2012. So they're going to look at these time gaps, and they're going to see statewide what they're doing. Now that information, you got to use it in some way. So if you're at the state level and you've been trying to generally, with what influence you have at the programmatic level, increase or maintain or increase tree canopy, that kind of assessment could give us some insight in how well we're doing. Could be true for a county too. So if the county says, hey, we're doing great, and then the assessment comes out and they're looking at the data and it's not as great, then that's another opportunity for maybe civic engagement and awareness to say, hey, the tree canopy was either gained or lost. Where? Let's look at it on a map. What can we do to really set an expectation of maintaining this tree canopy in which places, and then have more incorporation within policy and permitting. So it has multiple layers of incorporation. Scientific assessment gives us data, but then we have to do something with it. So I think the good news is that we're continuing to invest in the best available science to make sure we have the information we need to do that kind of assessment, like how is our tree canopy doing? But then it really takes all of us to kind of ask, well, okay, does that mean we're really on track to meet our state goals or not? And if not, what can we do? What other levers can we pull? Whether that's incentivizing an increase in tree canopy because we're trying to plant more trees, or does it mean that we want to have potentially more restrictions around development? I think that's an open question because it depends on, especially at the county scale, right? But I think you're right. For an unincorporated, somebody who's living in an unincorporated area, talking to the city council or taking a look at the new climate action plan and kind of asking, how are you going to enforce these new tree canopy goals that are set, is a good, fair question. And then continuing to ask the mechanisms, policy and program mechanisms, that's the way you're going to get at it.
Well, look at where the new Wawa is going to be. I mean, that was totally trees, and it's like nothing left.
And we thought that and thought that. So, point of information. Can this, I know it's county driven. Thank you. I know it's county driven, but like when we're fighting something like Wawa or Guilford Woods, can the state help us in any way?
Well, I think what we're trying to do is develop information or data that could be helpful to inform that point of conversation. So at the university, actually, I helped us develop our forest carbon accounting. So we quantified how much carbon was in Guilford Woods, and we gave that to the university because the university has to manage its forest carbon across all of that landscape, including properties it owns across the state. So one tool in the toolbox is that we're mapping and quantifying those benefits as a point of discussion to inform, like, okay, is this okay? And if not, from just that carbon lens, there's other lenses you could use, but from the carbon lens, how are you going to mitigate that or make that up? Or what's the cost associated with that? So I think what the state's trying to do is improve our monitoring and quantifying those benefits so we can actually track them. So instead of, if Wawa goes and builds that and they remove trees, but they say that they're mitigating them to be compliant and planting them somewhere else, we can see where they're planting them, or we can map them. We can kind of provide some level of assessment or oversight. So in that sense, the state's trying to improve its ability to do that, to give more transparency to all of us to see how we're doing relative to those goals. I think there are existing programmatic levers around conservation, like the Maryland Forest Service provides, and often it's looking at people who own, at least an acre or more of contiguous forest patches. That's kind of who they're targeting. But I think increasingly more thinking about programs to help landowners protect what they have is important too. So the state does have existing programs around forest conservation and tree planting. I think, yeah, it's a good question to keep asking, how the state continues to work with all of its county and municipality partners to improve alignment of objectives and really, try to do more to enforce.
Especially when the county has a record for development. Well, the county council.
Mary, did you want to ask your question?
I don't know if we have enough time.
Well, this is the last question. My question has to do with your 5 million tree initiative. As part of that, are you trying to ensure that native trees and plants are because part of the problem that some of the people here have spoken of is when you have invasive trees or invasive plants, it actually can wreak more havoc than you get benefit from. So is that part of your equation?
Yes, actually, I didn't mention it, but I should have. That was an oversight on my part. But the law actually specifies that they must be 5 million native tree species. And those native tree species list is the commission I mentioned earlier is supposed to give insight or feedback on that list. But the Maryland Forest Service, for example, has a list of, I don't know how many, maybe 30 or so native tree species that are often, targeted for these kind of plantings, depending where they go and that kind of thing. But yes, they must, every tree being planted must be native, and it must be native according to some established list. And they're hoping that with additional technical assistance support, that means that consultation will be provided along the whole way to make sure that right tree gets in the right place.
There are nurseries in the state that are selling invasive plants and trees, and I guess the state has no way to step in because it's doing no good. They may be pretty, but they cause harm.
Well, let's just say that the influx of opportunity, economic opportunity towards sourcing 5 million trees is gonna have an influence on the landscaping and nursery industry, because you've got to start growing these trees now, especially urban trees that have to be higher caliber, a little bigger, taller, right? Put along the street than you might growing seedlings along the riverbed or something. So those trees require some time, and I think you're going to see nurseries trying to adapt to the opportunities. So depending on how that affects the rest of the demand, right, from other sources, that's at least one way we're trying to incentivize sourcing native trees locally. But yeah, otherwise, that's kind of, we can within our state programming, mandate that there be native trees. So we can't really, we don't want to affect your ability as a private landowner to choose something from a private nursery for your yard. But we can educate and inform about the real importance of native species.
Thank you so much. I think we need to turn off the. Oh, who has her hand? Oh, Jenna.
No,
Yes.
hi, I just wanted to say I need to leave. It was wonderful. Thank you so much, Jean, and thank you to all the presenters.
Okay, thank you, Jenna, and thanks to Paula, and thanks, Kimberly. All right, so I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
turn it off then. Okay.
Bye.
Okay, I'll turn that off. Well, that was fun because we got to have some other people on.